Okay, so I've titled this speech, Growing Up and Growing a Heart. Alternative titles included How You Can Be Clueless and Also Do Some Good. And I'm treating myself as a case study in how the Lord works with someone to take them from the raw materials of their lives and make them into something useful. I'll start by telling a bit of the story of how I came to be a pastor, and then I'll talk about a few of my experiences in that role and also in my marriage. One of the earliest memories I have of thinking about becoming a pastor actually happened right over there in the old foyer of the hall. You might remember that that area used to have a bunch of school photos and things. I remember that was the backdrop of this. And some nice old lady came over to talk to me some Sunday after church when I was probably in my early teens. And I'm not sure who it was. It might have been Winnie Cockrell, someone of that age. And anyway, this nice old lady came over to me to tell me that she thought I should be a minister. And I don't remember what I said. I probably said something like, what? Pardon? What? Something intelligent like that. Afterward, I remember thinking that the old lady didn't know what she was talking about. She probably just saw me to be a relatively well-behaved son of Lawson Smith, and she liked Lawson Smith, so she would think that Lawson Smith's son should become a minister. So she didn't know what she was talking about. I could just ignore it. I wasn't against the idea, but I also did not feel any particular call to that use. That was my dad's job, that was all. Fast forward a bit, we moved back to the States. I finished high school, and then I went on to university at Bernathen College of the New Church. In my last year of high school, I'd had some inkling that maybe this ministry thing would be fun, but I was also interested in graphic design and web design. And so I got to do internships with pastors and also an internship with a web design company. And I liked them both, but the ministry seemed to be a better fit for my skill set. And as an aside, I think people sometimes can get this idea that pastors all have this strong calling to serve in the ministry. And that was never my experience. My experience was more of one of evaluating the options I had and going with an option that seemed to make sense. I feel much more called to my work now than I ever did back then. And there were also self-focused reasons for picking it. Wanting people to approve of me, wanting to be seen as using my talents, wanting to be seen as working on something difficult, making the world a better place, etc. Those motivations were, and still are, part of the picture. So in my final year of college, I applied to the theological school and was accepted. And theological school was great. Tons of reading, discussing, thinking, arguing, trying to learn how to do public speaking and write sermons. We talked about lots of the heart side of things involved with being a pastor, but I was still very much in my head. What are the theories? What are the principles? What are the things we should do? What are the things we should not do? Head stuff. When I was in theological school, I was a bit worried about the heart part of the job. There are a number of passages about priests in the teachings of the New Church that say that good priests are motivated by a love for the salvation of souls. I liked studying the Word and talking about it, but it didn't feel like my motivation for wanting to be a priest had very much to do with salvation of souls. In Jeremiah, the Lord says to the people he will give them pastors after his own heart. And I wasn't sure I had the right heart for the job. I wanted to care about the salvation of souls, but it didn't feel like that was my motivation. So to give you just a little feel for how much young Malcolm was in his head, it was in the spring of my final year of university, before starting theological school in the autumn, that I proposed to Abby. And I don't remember exactly what I said, but I do remember that it involved a conversational segue. She was talking about where she might live after graduating from college, and I said, well, this might have something to do with that. Because you got to make sure there's a logical transition from conversation to proposal. And then I told Abby that I wanted to marry her, and I said some other things too, but nowhere in there did I say that I loved her. I later wrote her an email in which I told her that I loved her, and I said, quote, I didn't want to say it when I first asked you because I felt like it would unfairly influence your decision. Baby Malcolm. So restrained, trying so hard to do the right thing in the right way. So we take that guy, we put him in theological school for 3 years, fill him up on as much theory and teachings and skills as possible, give him a degree, ordain him, and then we send him off to New Church Westville in South Africa to be assistant to the pastor with Derek Lumsden. And when we arrived in February 2011, we had been married for 2.5 years, and we had a 7-month-old baby, and absolutely no clue. I was looking back, and the first sermon I preached here in Westville was part 2 in a series that Derek had already planned out about the disciples following the Lord. My sermon was about the text from Matthew chapter 10, when the Lord sent out his disciples to heal the sick and cast out demons and preach. Somehow this was a very appropriate text for my state. One of the headings in that sermon was, "Sent out before we feel ready." And here's part of what I said under that heading. We might think that it would be better to be totally prepared before doing anything, but this story seems to imply that the Lord wants us to learn on the job. The Lord's disciples had no idea what they were doing, and yet the Lord still sent them out. Do you get the sense that baby Malcolm was perhaps relating to disciples here a little bit? So looking back at my early years here in SA, I see myself still being very much in a school mode. I've been in school for 20 years, from grade R through a 4-year bachelor's degree and a 3-year master's program. What I knew how to do was school assignments. And so I would try to understand what my various assignments were in my new job and do them well. Preach a sermon, teach a class in the school, do something with the teens in the high school. I was doing things for people, but it wasn't because of some big altruistic goal to serve people. I was doing it because I wanted to do a good job of the things I was expected to do, and I wanted to do them well. And I thought that if I just worked hard enough and tried to do the right thing, that everything would work out well. And that was just not true. I mean, it's true in the big picture, in the long term, but it's not true when going through life day by day. You fail all the time, day by day. Not everything works out well, even if you try your hardest. So a little over a year after we moved here, we discovered that Abby was pregnant with twins. And less than a year after that, Derek announced that he was moving back to the States. About a year after that announcement, in July 2014, after we'd been in South Africa for a little over 3 years, at the age of 30, I found myself in the role of head pastor of New Church Westville. And in that year, on top of my normal workload for the church and the school, and on top of the steep learning curve for taking on the head pastor role, I also ended up doing 4 memorial services in 5 months, including the service for John Frost and the service for little John and Zaji, who passed away at 3 years old. At that point, Abby and I had a 4-year-old daughter and twin boys who were 1.5. That was a really hard and stressful time in our lives and in our marriage. Looking back, I can see now that certain things about ourselves and our relationship had to break so that we could build something stronger to deal with a heavier load. That schoolboy approach of trying to do all the things well for all the people wasn't going to work. The schoolboy needed to grow up. Now, I can see that breaking led to something new and better being built, but at that point, it just felt like things were breaking. And the rebuilding has taken years. It took a lot of time to work through the hurt of those years and to figure out better ways of understanding ourselves and each other and to figure out how to have a good and loving relationship. And I'm not telling you these things to look for sympathy. I'm saying it to remind myself that it was a lot. It was too much. I wasn't coping. And it's easy for me to forget that. Abby and I have realized that we can look back on times in our lives and wonder why we didn't get more done at one time or another, or why we didn't manage to get more involved in this thing or that thing. And often when we do that, we're forgetting all that was going on at those times and the cumulative effect of it all. And from a different angle, those same experiences and others like them in the years since then are what formed me into a better pastor. Because I was the one designated to do that pastor role, it meant that I was the one who had to figure out how to do that role. I became a pastor by attempting to do the work of a pastor. And if I think back on many of the years and experiences of my time here, a big part of my underlying feeling is I had no clue what I was doing, no clue. I had no clue how to balance an overwhelming amount of work stress with having young children. I had no clue how to be a good husband. I had no clue how to do a memorial service. And yet, in all those situations, something had to be done. And so I did something. And so I want to zoom in on how we do something when we have no clue how to do it. In that same chapter from the Gospel of Matthew that I preached about my first week in South Africa, Jesus says to his disciples, "Do not worry about how or what you should speak, for it will be given to you in that hour what you should speak. For it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father who speaks in you." Now, on the one hand, it feels pretentious and dangerously presumptive to reference this story in talking about me having to figure things out and say something. Am I claiming that the Lord's Holy Spirit has spoken through me? I feel very uncomfortable coming anywhere close to suggesting that. But what's the alternative? To claim credit for what I said? If I managed to say something useful at a memorial service or in a sermon or even in a conversation around a braai, it would be dishonest for me to claim credit for it. So for hypothetical reasons, let's imagine Malcolm did something good. He preached a good sermon, let's say. How do we account for that? Well, maybe his theological school training laid the groundwork. Maybe that explains 25% of the goodness of the sermon. He has access to good resources, reference tools, etc. Maybe that's another 25%. Then there's his experience as a pastor. Maybe that accounts for 10% of the goodness. And his hours spent working on that particular sermon. Maybe that's another 25%. And then let's throw in his upbringing, his IQ, his personality. Maybe that gets you up to explaining 100% of what makes for a good sermon. Except that it doesn't actually explain it at all. I can tell you from much experience that it's possible to have all those things and no kind of a good sermon. It still needs to come together. And that can't actually be accurately explained except as something that the Lord did. If it's something true and useful, then it's from the Lord. I do need to show up and work hard and do my bit, but that doesn't mean that I get to claim credit for the good thing. I just get the reward of being someone who gets to do something useful, and that's a pretty good reward. Now, along these lines, I want to share with you one of my favorite passages from the teachings of the New Church. It's been important to me for a long time. It talks about how we can do good that's actually good, and it talks about how we can be led by the Lord. It says, when a person shuns sins mentioned in the Ten Commandments and everywhere else in the Word, because they're opposed to the Word and therefore opposed to God, and because they're from hell, then a person is led by the Lord, and his works are good. Moreover, he is daily taught by the Lord what he must do and what he must say, also what he must preach or what he must write. For when evils are removed, he is continually under the Lord's guidance and in enlightenment. Yet he is not led and taught immediately by any dictate or by any perceptible inspiration, but by an influx into his spiritual delight, from which he has perception according to the truths of which his understanding consists. When he acts from this influx, he appears to be acting as if from himself, and yet he acknowledges in heart that it is from the Lord. So what this passage says to me is that it's my job to try to notice selfishness and evil coming into me and work hard not to act on those inclinations. If I do that, then the Lord can flow into me and help me do things that are actually good. So for example, in working on a sermon, I need to shun self-righteousness and superiority. It's hard, man. It's hard. I need to shun the desire to make fun of people whose opinions I disagree with. I need to shun the desire to try to make people like me by stroking their egos. I need to shun the desire to try to make the Lord's word say something that I want it to say, but it just doesn't actually say. I need to shun the desire to try to control people and make them think the way I think, because that's always going to be best if you think exactly the way I think. No, I need to shun that. And if I shun evils, the Lord will help me figure out what I need to say and what I need to not say, and do and not do. He's not going to tell me directly with some sort of dictate, Malcolm, now do this, say this part. But he will lead me using spiritual delight. What feels fun, what feels good. And I was very fortunate while I was in theological school to have an older minister who wasn't part of the theological school faculty come and give a couple of us theologues some classes on to how to approach sermon writing and delivery. And he called the series of discussions with us Preaching as Spiritual Practice. And he meant that preaching could and should be a spiritual practice like prayer or attending church or meditating. And he talked about how there was spiritual work to do throughout the process of researching, writing, delivering a sermon, and also even in the time after delivering a sermon, there was spiritual work to do. And I regularly think about those conversations in my work. And I'm interested in what it would be like for you to think about your work as spiritual practice, every stage of the process, the work that you do as spiritual work to be done. And one of the simple but profound things this older minister talked about in both picking a topic to preach about and thinking about the messages we might try to convey to somebody else was just asking the question, does it work? And it's ridiculous, but it is entirely possible to write a whole sermon and to preach to people, to tell them what they need to know and what they need to do, and to have never thought about whether that sermon would actually be helpful to me. And ever since those discussions with that minister, I've tried to ask myself that question throughout the process. Does it work? Does this help me? Am I bored by this? How do I hear this text talking to me? What's confusing to me about it? And I often feel very much like the disciples when there were thousands of hungry people to feed, and the Lord said, "You give them something to eat." I've only got 5 loaves of goodness and 2 fish of ideas. How is that going to be at all useful? But in that moment of not knowing what to do, the Lord shows up and makes a miracle. I experience this reality almost every single time I do Bible study. Like this past month, when I did Bible study on Honor Your Father and Your Mother. I did research and prep for leading that Bible study, and I had some things that I was intellectually excited to talk to people about, but it wasn't alive. It was like a plan for a building versus the actual building. But then I got to sit down with 5 different groups of people over the next couple of weeks, and then those teachings came alive in those discussions with other human beings. Suddenly things became 3-dimensional. There was life and spirit in the words. They mattered. I could take what little I had, and the Lord could make it enough to feed a multitude. So I don't worry as much anymore about having the right heart to be a pastor. That heart for the salvation of people's souls is a gift from the Lord. It's a piece of the Lord's infinite love for people, and He's giving it out for free. As I've gone through the motions of doing the work of a pastor over the years and gotten to work with people in happy times and really hard times, the Lord has given me some of that love for people, the salvation of people's souls. And I hope and pray that He's going to keep giving me more of that as I go on. There's a really helpful principle in the teachings of the new church that says, act precedes, a person's willingness follows. That means that sometimes we have to take action because we know it's the right thing to do, and sometime later we'll want to do it or want to have done it. We will all find ourselves in various roles and will be called upon to show up and serve in various ways. And as we do our best to serve the uses, the Lord will bless us with the love that we need. One of the blessings for me has been that these days my work doesn't feel so much like school assignments, finally. I feel more connected to the use that I'm trying to serve and the people I'm trying to help. But that's only come with time. So I don't want to end this by putting too tidy a bow on the whole thing. Part of what's hard about all of this is it's not a system that avoids failure. I've been in some hard situations and had to make some hard decisions. I've prayed, I've talked to lots of people and tried to be open to the Lord's leading. And looking back now, I would say that sometimes I flat out made the wrong call. I've also been in situations where I was trying to help, but I don't think that I helped. I think I made things worse. And I made things worse in ways that I've not always managed to fix. And the same thing is true in my marriage. Abby and I have made a lot of progress in our marriage, and we would never choose to go back to how things were before certain things broke for us. We're both more fully present in our marriage now. We're better at communicating with each other about difficult things and at trusting each other and forgiving each other. And there are still plenty of hard things ahead for us, hard conversations that will need to be had, more times of feeling lost, confused, and disconnected. We will have to keep working at it, keep messing up, and keep trying again. And I know that there are plenty of challenging situations ahead for me in my job in Bernathen. I will be stretched beyond my current ability to pastor. And with the Lord's help, I'll carry on trying hard, getting some things right and some things wrong, hurting others, feeling hurt, forgiving, breathing, praying, loving, caring, crying, sleeping, getting up the next day and trying again. And that's not how my younger perfectionistic self would have imagined life. He would be quite stressed, imagining that was how life was going to be. But these days, I actually find it quite an inspiring vision to picture getting to be part of a human race of people trying hard and messing up and trying again, with the Lord flowing into each of us in our context, in our jobs, and in our relationships, flowing into each of our little minds, each of our little hearts, helping each of us become a bit more loving, a bit more wise, helping each of us grow up and grow a heart. Thanks for listening.